We're talking today with Mr. Raymond Stafford of Byron Center, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University. Okay, Mr. Stafford, can you begin by telling us a little bit about yourself? For instance, where and when were you born?
I was born in Sault Ste Marie in 1937.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about your family background, what did your parents do and that kind of thing.
Well, both my parents are deceased. My father was, he worked on the Sault Ste. Marie locks and the Great Lakes Dredge and Dry Dock Company in Sault Ste. Marie. And he was mostly Chippewa Indian, and my mother was part Chippewa Indian. So I'm about 1/3 Chippewa Indian. And even back then, we moved out of Sault Ste. Marie in 1943 and moved to Hart, Michigan. But one of the reasons that we moved, and I'll have to say this, that my father was discriminated against so bad in Sault Ste. Marie for being Native American. So we moved out of there. But
there were at least some other Native Americans up in the UP, the Upper Peninsula. That's one of the few places east of the Mississippi where we had them. But at least, was it sort of the town itself where there was a problem, or more where he was working and the people he was working with, do you think?
No, overall. People, and after a while he couldn't get a job. And when the Great Lakes Dredge and Dry Dock moved out of there after they were finished, and he was without work. And I was just a young boy, and I ended up in the hospital in Marquette, Michigan with polio. And I spent over a year, I was paralyzed from the legs down. And so it all amounted to, we had to leave there, financial and everything else. And my uncle happened to live in Hart. And so he came up and asked if my dad would move out of there. Asked him. He said, I'll find a place, and which he did, and we ended up moving to Hart.
Okay, and then what kind of work did your father do when he got down there?
He worked for the old Norge manufacturing in Muskegon, the Norge plant. And then he was an inspector for the appliance company there. And then they closed up and moved out, and then he went to the other manufacturing there that worked, he worked for where they made Army vehicles and the Jeeps and everything else over in Muskegon.
Right, I think it's General Dynamics now, it was like Continental or something like that. But there was a big defense plant up there.
Yeah, he worked there, and then after that, then he worked up in Ludington as engineer on a construction plant up there. And so he got different work, and we lived on the farm up there. So.
Okay. Now, you said you were sick with polio. You were in the hospital for a year. Did you come out of the hospital able to walk again, or you said you were paralyzed and you're not now?
No, it's surprising. I left the hospital and went from Marquette. I was in the Marquette Children's Hospital, went to Sault Ste. Marie. And they told my mother I'd never walk again. And she says, yes. She says, yes, he will. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Okay. I mean, it did, obviously that would have been a lot of work and time and so forth to get back going again.
I do remember I went to school on crutches.
And then you were able to come down to Hart then. And did your family move down there before you left, or did you go with them?
I went with them.
Okay.
Went with them. We went across the ferry when the ferry was coming across, and we moved into Hart. We moved out on the farm, and we stayed there for a number of years. And I went to school in Hart, and My older brothers was in the Navy, and I wanted to join the service, and my dad had to sign for me, and he said no. And I said, well, one way or the other, I said, I want to go in the service. So one day we went down to Muskegon and went to the recruiters and went in, and I was determined I was going to go in the Marine Corps. He says, no. He says, you got brothers that's in the Navy. He says, if you want me to sign, he says, you got to go in the Navy.
Okay.
I want to go in the service.
Why did you want to go in the service? What was attractive about the service to you at that point?
Well, didn't know it at the time, but I do family research. And everything that I have researched, at that time, I had two brothers that was in the Navy. And the one ended up staying in the Navy. The other one was during the Second World War. He got out, and then he was recalled back in the Navy during Korea. So he had to go back in. And he went back in the service, and then his wife, surprisingly enough, they were just young, she got polio. And when she got polio, she was in bad shape, so he was discharged from the service. But he stayed in the reserves. And my other brother, he stayed in the Navy, and he was still in the Navy. But doing research, I do a lot of family research. When I did research, I found out that my great-grandfather, my great-uncle, and all of the family back then was up in Sault Ste Marie, and they were all connected with the sailing ships in Sault Ste Marie. So you put stuff together and you go back here and you go back there. And all of my ancestors was seagoing people. And it just, when I did research, I just looked at it and I says, that's why we ended up in the Navy. That's why we stayed in the Navy.
All right. So, now then you sign up, then just describe the process of induction, and in what year did you enlist?
I went in 1954.
Okay, so you were just 17 at that point.
17. And I went from Muskegon. They took us to Great Lakes, Illinois, and went through our basic training in Great Lakes, Illinois.
What did basic training there consist of? What did they have you do?
A lot of classrooms items and physical fitness and just military etiquette, and they get you indoctrinated on, your personal appearance and just a little bit of everything. And we marched a lot because we marched from classroom to classroom and out on the drill field and everything, and it was just everything to do with the military at the time.
Okay. And did you adjust to that relatively easily, or did you have a hard time?
No, I adjusted to it easy because I kept looking at my family. My brothers was in, and I'm one that said, hey, if they can do it, why can't I do it? And I adjusted to it very well. And I met a lot of good friends there, and it happened to be that my brother was already a first-class petty officer, and my company commander at that time was a first-class petty officer. So then I talked to him, and when I told him that my brother was in and was a first-class petty officer and everything, and he made you feel just like part of the family. And so I may have had a little advantage over a lot of the other guys, but, I adjusted good and
our company come out with high honors and everything, so.
Did you have a sense of what proportion of your company were men who had enlisted as opposed to people who were draftees?
I think the majority of the company I was with were, they enlisted on their own. They came into service, they wanted to be in the service.
They wanted to be there, and that can make a lot of stuff work better. Okay, now where did they send you after Great Lakes?
After Great Lakes, I ended up, you always get a little bit of leave time, and you go home, and you spend a little bit of time with the folks, and then my first duty station was Charleston, South Carolina, which was a minecraft base, and I was assigned to experimental minesweepers. They were small minecraft, and it was something that they were experimenting with, and they were classified as minesweeping launches, and we went out on the rivers there in Charleston, South Carolina, run all of them rivers over there, and they'd plant stuff there that we had to find, and we would sweep and everything. And
how big were these boats?
The Minecraft boats was only probably about 30 foot. They were 30-foot launches.
And how many men in the crew?
There was myself and the coxswain and one other. There was probably 3 of us at most of the time.
All right.
And at that time, they were experimenting with, because we would go out all day and sometime at night and whatever. And I'll never forget, they were experimenting with new rations for sea. And they would send us out, and we'd have a case of rations that for our lunch and everything else. And it wasn't too bad, and I don't know whatever happened to them, but you take a can and you turn it over and you poke 3 holes in it, and you reach down and get some salt water and put in there and set that there, and that salt water would activate with the chemicals, and turn it over and open the can, and you had a nice hot meal, whatever it happened to be. And,
of course, if you put tidal estuary salt water in there, who knows what else is in there? So it may not have gone over too well in the long run. Now, what kind of mine detection equipment did you have? How could you find a mine in a little boat like that?
Well, they were sweepers. The launches were sweepers, and we had long towing outfits that we towed these things that they float on the water, plus the cable goes down, and if you hit a mine, it explodes the mine.
So you're setting off mines. That's sort of how you do it. Do you have any idea why they thought they needed little boats like that to do this? Or
to get into coastal places, get in close quarters, because we could go through much shallower water. Because we had the MSLs, which was the launches, we had the MSBs, which was the boats, which was bigger, and then the MSOs, which was the minesweeper ocean, and then the mine layers. We had them all there at Charleston.
Okay. Now, did you work on different boats, or did you stay on the small ones?
We stayed on the small ones. Once we were assigned to the small ones, we had to get them outfitted and working and everything. So the crew that was set on there usually stayed. And but I can remember the first winter we were there, it was so cold that the salt water froze on the piers. And you know that in Charleston, South Carolina, and you think, boy, it's supposed to be warm down here. It's supposed to be warm. And that's when I met ended up being a real good friend of mine, because we didn't have no barracks down there. We stayed on what they called APL, okay? It was a living ship. It could be, if it was taken out to sea or taken someplace, it had to be towed usually. But it had your galley spaces on there, had the sleeping quarters, all your berthing places, and everything right there on this one unit. So we stayed there, and it wasn't too bad, except that you know, when you get into the berthing spaces, there's so many guys there that your bunks was 6 high.
Mm-hmm. So how much room did you have between bunks?
Oh, about so much. Enough to crawl in there and turn over, and that was about it. But ever once in a while, in the middle of the night, somebody would turn over or whatever, and all of a sudden you'd hear it crash, because when it was all hooked to the top with chains. Each bunk was hooked with a chain, and chain break, and all 6 bunks is on the deck. So, and it happened every once in a while.
And how long did they have you based in Charleston?
How long was I there? Yeah. Well, that winter, when it got so cold, and I met this friend of mine, I says, I hate to stay here another winter. He says, me neither. So we watched the board, and they say, don't volunteer for nothing when you're in the military. But we seen on the board there, they were posting different bases where they needed people. So we went up there, and I looked at the one, and I says, this looks good to me. And I said, I'm going to put in for it. And he says, let's do it. And we put in for Panama Canal Zone. And by the summer, we had orders for Panama Canal Zone, which was really surprising, but they needed people down there, and we volunteered. We were going.
All right.
So,
now, how did you get down to the Canal Zone?
we flew out of Charleston. Well, they let us go home again for a week. In between each duty station, they usually let you go home for a little bit of time. But we flew, and I ended up flying into, well, the plane flew in to Havana, Cuba, of all places. And we were some of the last active duty people that ever went into Havana, Cuba. And
what year was that?
That was 55.
Okay.
And I have a picture someplace of this friend of mine and me sitting in Havana, Cuba, because we had a layover there, and we got to go into Havana, and we were sitting there at a little outside beer garden, drinking a cool beer, and turned the label around so everybody could see it, and it's called Hot Tui Beer. And I don't even know if they have it anymore, but we drank a beer, and then we went back, and then we flew from there. Then we went into Panama Canal Zone. So
now, where did they base you then in the Canal Zone? What kind of place were you?
We went to. It was nice. It was good duty. We went to 15th Naval District headquarters, and it was Rodman Canal Zone. They had an Air Force base there, they had a Naval base there, and they had an Army base there. And Navy and Army base was more or less connected together, and the Air Force base was separate because it was out so that they could land the planes easier.
What kind of duty did you have there?
Well, we were on the security force. We ended up being on the security force, and we did a little bit of everything. If we had any dignitaries come down, we took them around to wherever they had to go, and made sure they got to where they were supposed to go and everything. And I ended up on one trip. I think we had 4 chaplains that come down there, and I took them up into the interior so that they could have. There was a big, you might say a resort, but it was a big motel, hotel, or whatever you want to call it, and I took them up there, and then they had their conference up there, and I stayed with them all the time, and brought them back, made sure that they got back to their headquarters base, and just different things like that there. And then one of the big deals that we had was when President Eisenhower come down, and all the security force was selected out, and we lined the streets because the president was coming through the base. He was going to tour the naval base and the Army base and everything, and we were selected for honor guard for Eisenhower. So we were all out there, standing out there, and He was going up through, waving out of the top of the car and hollering at all the guys and everything. It was quite an experience. And then they went through. We didn't go over, but he went through Panama City because the conference was in the Panamanian Hotel. It was a great big hotel there up on the hill. And that's where their conference was. But he was the only one. And it was a conference for all of the island presidents and everything. They were all going to meet there for this conference. And they had a big motorcade that went through Panama City. President Eisenhower was the only one that would stand up, look out the top of his car, wave to people, holler to people, and everything else. And all of the other ones from all the islands was afraid to stick their head out of the top of the car.
They thought someone was going to shoot at them?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And,
I don't know, was Panama an interesting place at that point? I mean, did you have shootings and things that were going on?
Oh, yeah. The president, was that just before I got down there? He was assassinated. He was assassinated down there. And I forget what the name it was. I think that was before I went down there. And, oh, yeah. We were on full alert at a lot of times down there. Something happened in Panama or whatever, all the bases went on full alert. So,
okay. Now you're talking about being on security duty. I mean, aside from sort of escorting VIPs around or being in an honor guard and that kind of thing, what kind of daily duties did you normally have?
Well, we had a shop there. We worked through in the shop. We kept up a lot of stuff on the base for our own, our own use there. And you got to realize that, I was just a seaman. I had just went into service. I was junior, and so just about anything that they asked you to do, that's what you did, And so we cleaned barracks, we cleaned shops, we worked in shops and everything else. And then when they needed something else, they would pull us out, and because we were part of the security force, and send us here or there.
Okay.
It was good duty for a young guy,
Now, how long did you do this?
I stayed there for 1 year, and then they transferred me across to the other side of the canal, which was Decommissioning Canal Zone, to another security force over there. And I was transferred over, and then I was put on security again, but this was water security. So we had we were on the boats running in and out, and our duty over there was, let me go back just a step here to put it together. When I was on the other side with the 15th Naval District Headquarters, we had a pier there that went way out into the water, and we watched all the ships that come in to the canal. And that was part of our job, because we had duty down there. We'd take turns standing duty down there watching the ships, and then we had to log and report all the ships that was going through the canal from that side. And either coming in or out, either one. And then when I got transferred to the opposite side, then we had water security, and there we had to check the ships going through the canal. And a lot of times, if it was a foreign flag, then we had to take the Marines out, let them board the ship, and then they would ride that ship to the other side of the canal. And then they would bus them back to our side, and we did that quite often. And we had, like I say, water security. While I was down there, we had, just up the coast, we had one plane crash that we had to go to. And then on the base, we had one helicopter crash that we had to go to. So different things like that was for, the security and everything. So, and some of that, we had to go around on the boats and make sure that nobody else got anywhere close to it.
Now, what kinds of things were people worried about? I think, were they worried about sabotage or smuggling, or what kinds of things were you looking out for?
Well, when we put the Marines on the boats, they were looking for foreign ships going through there, the canal, if it ever sent a ship through there and they had explosives on there or whatever, hey, that canal's got a problem.
Right.
So we had to make sure that everything was clear for them to go through the canal.
Did you ever have any real issues as far as you could tell?
No. We even had some Russian ships go through there at the time. And not a problem. Not a problem. The only problem that we had is when we had the plane crash, and then they had to send divers down because they had a lot of sophisticated radio gear on there to try to get off that plane. And unfortunately, all the crew that was on there, they were all killed on that plane crash. But that was a water crash too. That it landed in the water and it exploded. But then they were down there trying to find all the boxes for it and everything else. But other than that. No, didn't have a problem down there.
All right. Now, how long did you do that kind of work?
I stayed there for a year. And then while I was down there, I decided, well, I'm going to stay in. I reenlisted. And I volunteered to stay down there because it was good duty. Hey, nice weather and everything. And they said, okay. So I reenlisted, and not too long after I reenlisted, they decided to close part of the base. So when they closed part of the base, that means I got a set of orders. I wasn't going to stay there. So
where did you go next?
I ended up going to back to Norfolk, Virginia, and that's when, for a 20-year-old, I was amazed at my next duty station because then I went aboard the USS Iowa, which was the battleship.
Right.
And went aboard that, and it ended up being the best ship that I was ever on. And so I went aboard that, and right after I went aboard, this is, quite the experience because we were in Norfolk, Virginia, and we got orders that all ships that could get underway, get out of there.
Okay.
We had a hurricane coming in. And so we took off and left there, and we got out into Cape Hatteras and run directly into the hurricane.
Hurricane off Cape Hatteras, maybe not such a good place to be.
Oh,
so
boy.
What was it like to be on a battleship in a hurricane?
Can't go outside. You can't do nothing. Wherever you walk, you hang on. And whenever we went out, because we were a command ship, we had all the escorts with us. And so we went out, and I don't know, the same battleship, I have the picture of it over there. If you look at it, it's got two 16-inch mounts forward on it and one 16-inch mount aft. The seas got so rough that we were taking on water that was splashing over the second 16-inch mount forward and hitting the bridge where they had the wipers going just as fast as they could, and trying to watch where they were going. And the only thing that we could do is look out some of the portholes and see what was going on out there. And I would hate to be on the escort ships because we had destroyers as escorts, and you're going along and you see the lights of the destroyer, and all of a sudden you don't see no lights, and pretty soon you see the lights, and it would be just like throwing a cork in a bucket and just shaking that bucket, and that's just the way them destroyers was out there.
Did you lose any ships in that hurricane?
No, we did not.
Okay.
No. Pretty tough ships, all of them.
But it was a good introduction to ocean duty then.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Now, what assignment did you have on the Iowa?
I worked for the personnel officer, which was kind of unusual. But seeing that I was on security and everything, they probably figured I knew a little bit about different things aboard the ship. So I was assigned to the personnel officer, and then we ended up going on not too long after the hurricane, we ended up going to San Juan, Puerto Rico. And we went down to the firing range down there, which is an island, and I don't know, there was so much controversy on it that they may not have it now, but it was an island out there that they did nothing but fire practice on. And so we made one pass, and the commanding officer, he gets on the ship's speaker system, and okay, here's our target over there, and you look over there, and it's all trees and green and nice and everything, and so we make a pass, and we come back around, and nobody is outside when the 16-inch guns are fired. Nobody can be out on deck. And we made our second pass, and we fired. And when they fire, they fire forward on the three barrels, and it's all 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then aft 1, 2, 3. And so we made the run, we fired, and we went back around, and then we could go out on deck and everything and go look. It's nothing but brown. There's nothing left over there. Not a tree around over there, nothing. And it's amazing the destruction that a 16-inch gun will do. But you figure 16-inch gun is, like the old saying is, it's like throwing a Volkswagen car 27 miles. And like they say, all the guys I talked to in Vietnam was if they had to have gunfire support, if a battleship was in the area, they called for the battleship. Because some guys could put a 16-inch shell, like that one guy says, he could put it in their back pocket if he wanted it. That's how accurate they are. But quite firepower.
All right. So, now, were you still just a rank of seaman at that point, or
yes. I didn't. I really first went in having a good time and everything. Didn't really care. Didn't know what I was going to do or anything else. And then we put when we come back in, we had to go to Yorktown, Virginia, and we had to unload all of the ammunition that was on the ship. Then we found out that they were going to decommission the ship, and it was going into Philadelphia. So I rowed the ship to Philadelphia and put it in the dry dock there, and they decommissioned it. And I still worked for the personnel officer, and we were some of the last ones off of the ship, and packed up everything that we could and had to send it to warehouses and probably to the archives or whatever, And right towards the end, one of the last things that, actually kind of scary because they go by compartment to compartment and they secure this one, they secure that one and everything else. Well, there's a bunch of us guys sleeping down in this one compartment and they turned the heat off. And so we got up and it was pretty darn cold and found out that the big watertight hatch that was up above the ladder was all skewered down and locked up. We sat there until noon, freezing with blankets around us and everything, pounding on the hatch with a pipe until almost noon, and finally somebody heard us and they opened it up and we were all down in that compartment yet. We'd have froze to death down there. But we got out and we finished all the work we had to do on the ship, and then I got orders from there and didn't know where I was going, and I get orders for a ship that was being built just a couple piers down from us. So I ended up going there, which was the USS Galveston.
And what was that?
That was a guided missile light cruiser. And it was the first guided missile cruiser that the Navy had for Talos missiles.
And what were those?
They had one launcher on the back, and it was a missile for aircraft mainly. And so we outfitted that ship, and we took it on different cruises for experimental, and we ended up down in San Juan, Puerto Rico, same place that we had been, because that's the firing range.
Right.
and we'd fire off the missiles. And they had one launcher on the back, and every time we'd fire a missile, there was so much smoke and burn and everything. They had special type paint and everything that they didn't want nobody to know what we were doing. So when we were out at sea, that whole back end of the ship had to be repainted and everything, and all cleaned up. And and we could never be outside. And so this one time they said, okay, we're getting this down pretty good. So this next firing, if the crew wants to be outside, then we can go up on the forecastle, which is all the way up front, and watch the missile launch. So we did. A whole bunch of guys was up there, and they launched the missile, and that thing took off, and I mean, they move, and I went right straight up like that there, and all of a sudden that thing turned and come out. Coming right back towards us.
Oh.
And everybody's looking, and they're going, hey, they're going to have to do something, and then all of a sudden they exploded. They exploded from in the ship, you know, and parts of that missile fell on the ship. That's how close it was. But it wasn't fail-safe at that time. You know, they would return to the ship for some reason. They were talking, you know, that if it didn't go right, that it would return, and that one was returning. So kind of gave everybody a scare. But I spent probably a year and a half on that, and then went different cruises down south mostly, and then I was transferred from there to base duty, which was Little Creek, Virginia, which was good duty too. I run a shop down there, and my brother was stationed there at the time, so we had family there, and get back and forth. And I had a carpenter shop there that I run, and but when I was aboard the Galveston, I went to school. And so that's when I decided, hey, if I'm going to do something, I better, you know, try to get some rate and make some more money and this and that. So I went to school, and while I was in school, I made my first petty officer rating. So I made petty officer 3rd class. And then with that rating, then I went to Little Creek, Virginia, and went to a carpenter shop. So I run a carpenter shop for the base there. And while I was at that carpenter shop, I made petty officer 2nd class. So, and then I was on the way. I went from there, and I went to the USS Sierra, which was a destroyer repair ship from Little Creek, Virginia, and went there, and I was in a shop there, back and forth. It was a repair shop, and because we took care of all the repairs and stuff that was needed on the destroyers that was there. From there, I went to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The ship was assigned down there because they had problems with ships down there, that they sent us down there to help out with the repairs on different ships.
Now, what year was this?
No. That was in 60s.
Was it sort of before the Cuban Missile Crisis at this point?
Well, we were in Cuba at Guantanamo Bay when we were on full alert, get out of there, and we went on the gun line for the Cuban Missile Crisis. So what was that, 63? 62, okay. So we were pulled out of Guantanamo Bay and put on the gun line and right outside of Havana and on that side. And that's when the ships were still coming in, when Kennedy and Khrushchev was on the hotline, back and forth, and we lost a plane down there. One of our planes was shot down. And I think at that time they figured that it was shot down by one of the Russian missiles that was down there. And that's when Kennedy put up the Cuban blockade.
And you talk about being on the gun line. Were you blockading Cuba, sort of? You were tracking the ships?
They had all the ships that come out of Cuba, Norfolk, Virginia, Florida, anybody that was in the area. They actually had ships that surrounded Cuba. They went all the way around. We happened to be on the one end. And there was one big Russian freighter that came in there, was carrying missile parts and everything, and they were told to stop. And after the plane went down, Khrushchev was on the phone, and he said, big mistake, wasn't supposed to happen, and all of this and that. But that's when Kennedy put up the blockade.
Right.
It says, get everything out of there. And they refused, and they sent another ship in, and the ship said, no, we're not stopping. Well, when a couple of the destroyers fired across the bow of that ship, they said, oh, these people mean business.
Right.
We better turn around. So they turned around, and they removed everything out of Cuba at that time. So then we went back from there, then we headed back to Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay. Now, when this was actually happening, how much did you know about what was going on?
Not much. Not much, because they put us out there, and they said the only thing we knew is that the president declared an emergency, and there were going to be a blockade of Cuba. Nothing in and out of Cuba. And we went out there, and we sat out there and waited until all the crisis was over and everything, and when it was over, then we went back to our home port.
Now, what sort of place was Guantanamo at that point, or how would you describe it relative to the other bases you were at?
Well, Guantanamo is just it's a place where a lot of the ships go in. It's a big training base is actually what it amounts to. We send ships down there all the time for what they call underway training. And it's easy to get in and out and everything, and they send them out, and they have different ships down there, and they board all the different ships they go from one to another and give each other training and everything, especially if they're going to go overseas someplace. We didn't really go down there for that. We went down there for the repair and upkeep of some of the ships that was down there. That's the type of ship I was on. So, but when they called everybody out, everybody went up. If the ship could get underway, it was out of there.
Right.
They went out. Wherever they were assigned, they went out, and that's where they stayed until the thing was over.
Now, did you mainly stay on your ship, or were you quartered on shore, or what did you do?
No, we were on the ship.
All right.
We were on the ship. We could go on the base some, but there wasn't much there really. There was where you could buy. There was a PX and different things. And at that time, the guys that was actually stationed there, based at the Guantanamo, they had housing there and some of the dependents could come down, and so they were stationed down there for a year, 2 years at a time, and but that's at the same time too that Castro took over.
Right.
And when he took over, he got the big idea that the base couldn't survive without his fresh water, and they had fresh water that come from the Cuban side, but at the same time they didn't know that the United States was sending a lot of parts down there, and they had their own distilling plant set up on the other side, and they were pulling salt water, and they made all kinds of fresh water, same as the ship would.
Right.
And so Castro come down, and he thought it was a big deal. He was going to cut the valve off, and it was just on the other side of the fence into Cuba. He's out there turning the big valve off. Says, okay, you're without water, and at the other end they're turning the other valves on. We got all kinds of water, and so they survived it, And so, but he thought he was doing a big deal that he was going to cut all the water off because he wanted the United States to move out of there.
Right.
He wanted them out, but it's still there. It's still there. So.
Yeah. In your picture collection, I think you have a picture of President Kennedy in there someplace. Did he come down to Guantanamo while you were there? Or?
No. Kennedy, I have a little booklet on Kennedy in here. That was from when one of my next duty stations that I had was with the USS Holland, which was a submarine repair ship, tender. And they, at that time, Kennedy went to watch a missile launch from a submarine that was submerged underwater. And he was on a ship that was off ways when then they fired the missile, and he was there. And that was not too long before he was assassinated. And Kennedy was assassinated, and then we went on full alert again, of course. Everything is all up in the air, and so everybody's on full alert. But I went from a destroyer repair ship to a submarine repair ship, and took the submarine repair ship to Spain. And between all these ships, had schooling here and schooling there, and then took the ship to Rota, Spain, which was the USS Holland. Took it to Rota, Spain, and it was one of the roughest trips that I ever had, besides on the battleship, because we hit a storm going across, and they told us to go south, because we left Charleston, South Carolina, go south around the islands, and come back up en route. We hit deadhead right into the storm. And we rode that storm out for about 5 days.
Wow.
And we were fully loaded. We had missiles on board and everything. And this was a big ship. And we had a big overhead crane that was on there. And this crane was to raise missiles out of our ship and then swing it around, and they could run it out and then set them right down into the submarines. And these were nuclear-powered submarines, Polaris submarines, so they're huge submarines. And our missile crane, it got so rough that some of the cables started stretching. So the crane was moving just ever so lightly, but it was moving. So the commanding officer got our explosive ordnance people out there, set charges around the base of that crane. And we had to set down in what they call damage control central. And I don't know if you know what a clinometer is.
Nope.
Okay. It's the bubble that rolls that shows what list your ship is. And you set down there, and it's got usually 3 of them in there. And these bubbles are supposed to be straight up. Okay, as the ship rolls, it comes down. As it rolls, it comes down. If it got to a certain point, whoever's on them watching the clinometers, and it'll drive you crazy because your eyes are going. But you got the phones on, and it's directly to the bridge. If it hits this point, then you let them know, and the commanding officer will order the crane blowed off of the ship, because if it broke loose, it could capsize the ship. That's how much weight there was there. And the captain had, he'd give the order. If he had to give the order, then that would be blown off to try to set the ship up.
And did you have to do that, or did you make it?
No. We rode the storm out for about 5 days. We were late getting into our destination, and we ended up into Rota, Spain. And then we set up our Polaris base there. And when we got there, we didn't really know what was going on until we got in there, and then they said, okay, we got a Medmore. Never heard of the term before. And I said, okay, because we were in charge of all the forward anchors, anchor detail and everything. That was part of our job. And so turn the ship around. Medmore means that you back up to the pier, the end of the pier. So we turned the ship around, drop both forward anchors to hold us in place, and we backed down, and we backed the stern of the ship up to the pier. And then we tied up to the pier, and then took up the anchors. This way we can get submarines on both sides of the ship to work on. And we stayed that way. We'd go out, but when we come back in, then we'd have to bed more again and do it all over again.
Now, in your duties, were you going onto the submarines themselves? So what did you think of submarines?
I worked on them. I went aboard them. Wouldn't want to ride them. So, and those submarines has what they call a blue and a gold crew. Okay, them submarines will go out for 4 to 6 months. They come back in. They come alongside of us. The crew is all packed up, and the crew completely leaves the ship. And another crew comes aboard. Captain, everybody. They change the whole ship. They outfit it again, get all their supplies, and check out anything that needs to be checked out, and they're off again. And that crew that come off goes back to the States. They go to schooling, and they take their leave, and they do whatever, and they hang around there. And that crew is usually assigned to the same submarine each time because they're indoctrinated for that submarine. But they got a blue and gold crew. And they'd go out, you'd see them go out and get out into deep water. You can see them going out, and all of a sudden they disappear. 4 to 6 months later, you see them pop up out there, and they come back, come alongside. So it was quite a deal. At all of the submarines, we had, at times we had 6 submarines, 3 on each side that we were working on or loading or whatever. Everything was, was up to us on that repair ship, and we carried the supplies. So,
now, how long did you continue on with that duty?
I was there for 2 years, a little over 2 years. And while I was aboard that ship, I made Petty Officer First Class and stayed there. And then I got transferred from there back to the States and went aboard a guided missile destroyer. Aboard the guided missile destroyer, it was out of Norfolk, Virginia. And we went in and out of there, and a lot of plane guard off of Florida for the reserve carriers that was down there.
Plane guard, that is, you're providing anti-aircraft protection, or? Yeah,
and if they had any accidents where the pilots that were flying off of the aircraft carriers were all just learning to fly and learning to go on and off of the aircraft carriers, and so sometime they would end up in the drink, and we'd have to pick them up. And we had a couple of them there that we had to pick up the pilots. They'd bail out, and then we'd have to sink the plane. There wasn't nothing on them. They were practice planes, but they couldn't, try to pull them up and this and that. So we'd use them for target practice and sink them. And then we'd, a lot of times, seeing that we were such a small ship, we'd do some bartering back and forth. If they want their pilot back, then, hey, send us some of the newest movies and stuff like that. And so they'd always send us something over to get their pilot back, and so we'd use that for a barter. But we were down off of Florida, and one of our cruises, we were on our way down there, and the captain got orders to turn around and make all possible speed to New York. Nobody knew what was going on, nothing. And he turned around and he announced it. He says, I have no orders, no nothing, don't know what's going on until in the morning, but they said turn around and make all possible speed to New York. And you get an order like that there, and what's going on? What's happening in New York? So the word is passed, and you make sure that everything is ready. If it's an emergency or whatever, that you better be ready. And so then the next morning, he gets on the speaker again, and then he announces that we're going into New York to Bethesda Naval Hospital. That the last crew member that we transferred out of Norfolk, Virginia, ended up in the hospital. He had TB. Well, when we got to New York, we were quarantined as soon as we hit. And all the medical staff come aboard and everything else. And it's the first ship that I ever seen or ever was on or ever heard of that was completely decontaminated. The ventilation systems, all the compartments, they would block off a compartment and they decontaminate. And every crew member on board ship had to spend 3 days in the hospital. To the hospital, spent 3 days there, and then they'd rotate and bring them back until every member of the ship went through the hospital. And they were checked for TB and run all the tests and everything, and then we were released. We spent about a month or a little over up there, and then we were released from there and went back to Norfolk. We were there for a little while, and we went out again, went down to Florida, and we were on our way to Florida, and then we get another message. Went through all this other stuff. So we said, oh, now what's going on? It says, your ship was selected to go to Alabama Mardi Gras.
Okay.
So go around Florida and go up in by Alabama, and we went up to the river. We went up to Alabama River, went up into Mobile, Alabama, and spent a week there. Open house on the ship to let everybody go aboard where they could and everything. And so they rewarded us with going into Mobile, Alabama to the Mardi Gras.
Now, at this point in your story, you've gotten us now kind of into the mid-1960s, and we're getting into the Vietnam era and so forth. Were a lot of ships and so forth being kind of sent over to the Pacific or that kind of thing? Or
yeah, they were rotating a lot of ships back and forth. I went aboard the Richard E. Byrd, and I reenlisted there again, and before that I had made first class petty officer, and then the Richard E. Byrd was going back to the Mediterranean, and well, I had just spent time over there and I didn't want to go back there. And I talked to the commanding officer and I said, my enlistment's up. I says, I'll get out and go someplace else and re-enlist. And he said, oh, no, because they get credit for re-enlistment on the ship. So he said, why, where do you want to go? And I said, I'm due for shore duty someplace. And I said, I've been overseas, I've been here and there, and I said, all the ships. So I said, I'd like to get my shore duty. So he says, let me make some phone calls. He made some phone calls, and he called me up. He says, yep. He says, you're due for rotation. He says, you re-enlist on my ship, wherever you want to re-enlist, and I'll see to it that when we get back in, you're transferred over to another ship, even if it's just temporary, until your base duty comes in. I said, that's fair enough. He said, where do you want to re-enlist? I said, furthest point away from home port. Well, that was the Mobile River. So when we were going up the Mobile River, I was standing up there and getting swore in for another 6 years, and went to Mardi Gras, and then we left there and went back into Norfolk, Virginia. And he was good to his word. He transferred me over to USS Orion.
What kind of ship was that?
That was a repair ship also, out of Norfolk, Virginia. And that was temporary duty. And I stayed there until my orders come in, and I had orders. In fact, I went up to Washington. A friend of mine and I went up there because he was due for rotation to see what we could find close to home. And he got what he wanted, and they asked me what I wanted, and I says, Grand Rapids, Michigan. He looked it up. He says, no. He says, you're too senior. They don't rate them up there. And I said, okay, how close can you get me? He says, Great Lakes, Illinois. And I says, oh, that's not too bad. What kind of duty is that? He says, company commander, pushing boots. No thank you. I said, let's look for something else. He said, well, there's a billet opening up. He says, in Columbus, Ohio. I said, what is that? He says, Naval Reserve Training Center. I said, I'll take it. So I had orders for Columbus, Ohio, and I went there, and I ended up taking the test for Chief Petty Officer, and July, after I got there, I got my certificate back that I had made Chief Petty Officer.
And then what year was this?
That was in 67.
Okay.
Yeah, 67, 68, 69, 70. I was stationed there, and in the meantime, they were building a brand new reserve center. And so there was I had made chief, and there was a chief bosun mate there, and we got together, and we had to move this whole training center from one end of town to the other. And so he took one center, I took the other center, and we transferred everything from the old training center down to the new training center, even the 5-inch gun mount. If you can picture a big flatbed truck going down the highway with a 5-inch mount on it. And we had anti-aircraft guns that they use for practice and everything, you know, and load them on a big old flatbed, and here they come down through. And we moved everything that we had from one center to the other, and opened up the new training center. And I ended up being Station Chief Petty Officer, and I was in charge of the whole station then. I worked directly for the commanding officer, and we trained the reserves, the recruits, and everything, getting them ready for active duty, and then from there we'd send them to active duty.
Right. Now, you're doing this, you're stationed, you know, you're stateside, you're in the middle of the country, and it's right in the era of the Vietnam War and protests and a lot of anti-military sentiment. Was it a problem for you being in the military or being in uniform and, you know, out there in town? Did you have much of an issue there?
No. The only problem we had is if you had Michigan plates on and you went downtown Columbus, Ohio, you better watch yourself, because Ohio State and Michigan was the football teams, and whoever won the football team, you better not be on the street.
Right, that was the Woody Hayes era, so that was
That's
dangerous.
Woody Hayes, yes.
Okay.
That was Woody Hayes, and then old Bo Schenbecker was Michigan, but you couldn't go out. Depending on what plates you had in your car, you better not go out there. That's the only problem that we had.
I don't know, did Ohio State or Columbus, I mean, did they have anti-war protests or things like that?
Ohio State did some, but it wasn't that, at that time, it wasn't, they had protests all over, but not so much around there. There was quite a bit of military around there, and, because we had a defense supply center that was right next to us. We had the Naval Reserve Training Center, and had a lot of guys that was from around Columbus and everything that was in the reserve units, and they were there, and we didn't have the problem. But I was there, and I had made Chief Petty Officer, and that was one of the that's one of your top ratings in the Navy is Chief Petty Officer. Once you made that, hey, you got it made. And but I was there, and we had settled into the new training center, and we had a lot of dignitaries there and everybody else. And in fact, I met Woody Hayes, and we had a luncheon for General Lewis B. Walt. He was a Marine commander in Vietnam. Him and Woody Hayes went to school together, so they were big buddies. So we had a big luncheon for him, and I met Woody Hayes, and I met General Walt, and but Not too long after we got settled in over there, the commanding officer come to me and he says, oh, I got this envelope here. He says, you're supposed to open it and this and that. He says, I don't know what it is. And he says, it's from Great Lakes, Illinois, and through Washington, D.C. I said, okay. He says, here you go. He says, go in there, open it up, see what it is. So I went in, opened it up, and it was a aptitude test. And I'm looking at it, and I said, what in the world? And I called out, I says, Commander, I says, this is a test. He says, hey, I got my orders, you got yours. Take the test. And so I sat in there and took the test. Put it back in the envelope and give it back to the CO. He said, okay. He sent it in about a week later. And he says, hey, you passed the test. I said, I don't even know what it was. It didn't make sense to me. He said, yeah, but you passed the test. I said, okay. So then he gets a letter. He comes to me again. He says, hey, you're being considered for an overseas assignment. I said, really? He says, and a couple weeks later, and nobody knows what's going on. A couple weeks later, I get another letter, get my orders. Going to Monterey, California, to the Defense Language Institute. You're going to learn Vietnamese.
Okay.
So, all right. So I got transferred from the Naval Reserve Training Center out to Monterey, California, Defense Language Institute. And spent 15 weeks there. And Vietnamese is one of the hardest languages you'd ever want to try to learn. They can say the same word, and it depends on the pitch of their voice. It means absolutely different, And if you ever hear Vietnamese in the store or something, their voices go up and they're talking back and forth. They're saying one thing, and you think you understand it, but you don't. It's something opposite. And so, anyway, I went to that for 15 weeks. Then I ended up going to Camp Pendleton, to another school down there. It's a survival school.
That's the Marine base down there, right?
Yep. And then I went there, and I was back and forth between San Diego and Camp Pendleton, and I finished Monterey, so I didn't go back there. And then they assigned me to a group of, there was 55 men in the group. And it was a school for escape, evasion, survival. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It's what they call their SEER training. It's the roughest school that any military service has got. I said, what am I doing here? And so then you get my orders. You're going to Vietnam as a naval advisor. Okay, so they put us through the school. In that school, they drop you off on the beach. You spend 3 or 4 days on the beach, surviving on the beach. Nothing to eat, no water, no nothing. And it's really surprising because at that time I was chief petty officer, so I was a little bit older than some of the guys that was going. And we had little fish lines and everything, and we could catch whatever right there on the beach. And we caught some the big blue channel crabs, and we caught a lobster. We had a fire going, and we'd fix this stuff and share everything. These young guys wouldn't even taste it. They don't know what it is. I mean, you can't get them to eat it. Hey, you don't have nothing to eat. You better eat something. No. And so we spent 3 days, I think, on the beach. And then they come pick us up, take us into a classroom. They give us a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And we sat there in the classroom, and then they say, okay, you're going up into the mountains, and you have to make your way back to such and such a point, so they take us up in there and they tell us which way to go and this and that, and we have our compasses and everything else, and they give you a little deck of cards. Okay, you can eat this, you can't eat this, this is poisonous and everything, and so we get up there and then we have to make it down to a point down below the mountains right there, and we all went. We found a little bit of stuff that you could eat. Some of the yucca plants you can eat. It's just like sugar cane, and if you can find them, and we found a couple of them, and chop off the main part, and you chop it up and give each guy and it's just like sugar cane, it's nourishment anyway, and so we did that, and we got down to where we were supposed to go, and then they put us through another area right there where, okay, you got to go from here, cross over, there's a Jeep over on the hill. Anybody that makes it through this part right here will get an apple or an orange from the Jeep over there. 55 guys, and this is your evasion part, and 55 guys, 5 people made it through. All the rest of them was captured on the way through. And I mean, it sounded just like a war zone. And all the instructors that was in there were all Vietnam veterans. They were hollering in Vietnamese and carrying on and this and that, and they had the hats on with the red star on them and everything, and they made it as realistic as they could. 5 people made it through. And then when they go back and look at different stuff, who's the most likely to make it through? Your old farm boys.
Yep.
Farm boys. And I was one of them. I made it through. I got an orange at the other end. But you pay for it too, because then they capture everybody else, and now they're mad at you because you made it through. So they come and get you, and they throw you in the back of a truck, and they beat the crap out of you and everything, and all of this stuff. And then from there, they take you to a prison camp. And this prison camp is made up just as realistic as they can make it. And they strip you down, and you don't have nothing but your shorts and socks on, and they put you in a little box. About that wide, about that high, and you're crunched down in that box, and that's where you live. And they get you out, and they make you do exercise, calisthenics, and all of this type of stuff,
Now, what did you think of all of this while you're going through it? You wondering what the heck are they going to do with you?
Yeah. You wonder why are they doing this, but then it all makes sense afterwards, because what they're doing is preparing you if you were ever captured over there, what to expect. And this is what they do. And you live in that box. We lived in that box for a better part of a week. You didn't get nothing to eat. They take you out and interrogate you. And, I mean, by then you don't have no strength, and and they can grab a hold of you and they bounce you up against the wall and everything, and all of this stuff, and try to make you talk about this and that. And last resort for some of the senior people, big controversy right now is the water board. I don't know if you read the articles in the paper that the water board, they did that to us. And I'll tell you, if they put you on the water board, you'll tell them anything they want to know, because you think you're drowning. But they had it set up, they had a board set up there, and they had it on a swivel. Lay you on the board, tie your hands, and they put a towel over your face, and then they rotate that board, start pouring water on your face, and you think you're drowning. About twice like that, you'll tell them anything you want to know, whether it's the truth or if it's a lie or whatever, just to get off of the water board.
All right. Now, once you got through all of that, what did they do with you?
Well, we didn't get nothing to eat all the time we were there, and then the last day when the exercise was over, they had a big iron tub full of sloppy oatmeal, And they give everybody a dish of oatmeal, and hey, you were glad to get that. And then they tell you that the exercise was over. You know, everybody passed. All 55 guys that went through that passed. And it was just a training that you never have to go through it again, as long as you're in the service. And then when we were released from there, we went to San Diego, California, and finished up a little classroom and this and that, and then we were on a plane to Vietnam. And I flew from there to hit a couple of the islands, went to Hawaii, and
Okinawa or Guam?
Guam. We went from Hawaii to Guam to Saigon, and ended up in Saigon, and they had an old hotel. They called it the Saigon Hotel, and we ended up there, and they say, okay, find yourself a place to sleep over there. They got all kinds of bunks and everything, and you'll be, you know, transported to your next station probably the next day.
What did Saigon look like to you when you got there?
Just like if you go into some of these movies where it's all smoky and smelly and everything else, you know, and the hotel the same way. But that was mostly GIs that was in there. It was really surprising that I found me a place to sleep. I throwed my gear on the bunk there, and I was going to go find something to eat, and I'm walking down this hallway, and I look, and I see an old, dirty, grubby Marine walking towards me, and I looked, and I could tell the way he walked. I says, Dave? And he turned around and looked. And there was Dave Lang, a Marine sergeant that I was stationed with in Columbus, Ohio.
Oh.
Excuse me. For all the places to run into somebody, you know. So he said, what are you doing over here? And I said, well, I just got assigned here. And he said, well, I'm just leaving. He said, I'm leaving tomorrow. He was stationed with the Korean Marines as a Marine advisor. And he says, those people are crazy. He says, I'm out of here. He says, so we went and had a couple beers and talked and everything, and then he left out, and I left for the Mekong Delta area the next day. I was issued all my gear. They issued us all of our clothing that we didn't get in the States, and M16 rifles and everything, and took off for a little PBR base called Nabe.
And what's PBR?
That's the river patrol boats.
Okay.
Patrol boat, river,
Right.
So we had about 60 boats there, and I was again chief in charge. When I first got over there, I had 35 Vietnamese work for me and 15 Americans, and we took care of the boats there and patrolled the rivers and just a little bit of everything. And so we had a couple. We had to go. My first excursion was we had to go up the river with what they call a Mike boat, which was a steel hulled. All the PBRs were fiberglass. They were fast patrol boats, and we had some that was broke down or out of commission or got hit or something that was up past Saigon. So I had to take a crew from my base up the river past Saigon and go up in there and see if we could assist the boats and everything. But nothing happened. We didn't have anything, on that cruise. But we got all the boats out, and we returned to Saigon. And then one night we went on full alert again, and they said there was a ship coming down the river, and here we had all of our piers there that we were loading and unloading ammo, and we were getting the PBRs ready, and we had tons and tons of ammo that was sitting there on the pier. We had high-lows that were lifting them here and there and everything. There's a ship on fire coming down from Saigon, coming down the river, and be on the alert because it might end up down by you. And it did, right across the pier. We fought fire all night long until I got some big tugs out there in the morning. And the ship it was like a cargo ship. It wasn't one of ours. It was a cargo ship, but the ship was completely lost, and it ended up in the mud on the other side. The current carried it over just away from our base, but it lit up the whole sky. And it sat over there in the mud, and then the tugs come down, and they finally put the fire out, and that's where it sat. And when I left, it was still sitting over there in the mud.
Now, in the area where you were, was there a lot of enemy activity? I mean, were there mortar attacks or raids going on? Or
well, there was some just before I got there. The base had a mortar attack on, and it hit the CB barracks because we had a detachment of CBs there, and they were working all over the place. And one thing with the CBs, they get up early, and hey, they're on the road, or they get out and they go eat, and then get on the road and everything. Barracks was empty, and the barracks got hit and took part of the top of the barracks off and didn't have a casualty. No equipment was ruined or nothing. So that was just before I got there. And then one of our PBRs was hit right alongside of the pier, and lucky that whatever it was hit by, and we didn't go down to try to find it either. It was down in the mud because it went right through the bottom of the boat and it sunk the boat right there alongside the pier. And so stuff like that there. And then when we went to, I had to take a crew from my base, which was Nabe, went through Saigon. From Saigon went to Benoit Air Force Base. That was one of the biggest Air Force bases that we had over there. And then I was going from there. We had to go through the base and then hit the other side, and we're going to Vung Tau, which was on the coast. We had some PBRs and some boats over there that we had to get fixed so that they could get out of there and get underway. And so I took a crew over there, and we got turned around from one road to another when we got out of Benoit. And we ended up almost being in a firefight with some North Vietnamese regulars that the South Vietnamese Army and the advisors and some of the Army that was there had bunch of North Vietnamese regulars cornered in a rubber plantation. Well, we took the wrong fork, and we ended up right almost in the middle of them. But we were in contact with a little CB base out there, and they're telling us, turn around, get out of there, go this way, go that way, and we followed their directions, and we got out of there. And by this time, we're running out of gas, and I asked the guy, I says, hey, do you have any extra gas over there? And he said, yeah, and he told us where the base was. We made it over there. And he said, man, you got out of there just in time. He says, listen to this. And he had the radio on. And they had a firefight over there, and that just wouldn't quit. And so he says, but go back and then take where you made the fork. He says, take a left. He says, get on that highway there, take it right into Vung Tau over to the coast. And the CBs they're attached to the Navy. That's a Navy unit. And so he's on the radio on that. And so we got some gas and got out. And then we got back on the main highway right there, which was supposed to be the main highway, and going. And all of a sudden, the guys is hollering, we got company, and but it was our guys. A helicopter come and buzzed us, and you could see the gunners hanging out of the helicopters, and they're telling us, hey, okay, And then all of a sudden there's one behind us, and they escorted us all the way into Vung Tau. We had two Navy helicopters. That evidently the guy at the CB, he called them in, and
he didn't figure you could follow directions, so they were going to help.
No, he didn't know what was in the area. He didn't know if they, if the North Vietnamese, if they got out of that rubber plantation and got over where we was at, we wasn't very far from them, and so hey, we had two gunships that escorted us all the way to the coast into Vung Tau, so which was good. And so we did everything we had to do there, and then we had to return the same way. We went through Benoit Air Base and then back into Saigon, back through to Na Bay, and but we had a few incidents down there where they not our guys, but we were naval advisors or Army advisors, because I worked with some Marine advisors, Navy advisors, and we were all considered to them special forces, and they depended on us for, we had the base, they depended on us with the PBRs, and we had 4 helicopters there on our base, 2 Navy, 2 Army. They patrolled every morning. You could hear them wind up, and they went out, patrolled all the way around, and every once in a while you'd hear them, sending off rockets or whatever, because we were close enough where the Vietnamese can build a bridge faster than anybody you ever seen. They could go across the river, they'd have all the stuff they'd throw across the river, they'd get as close as they can to your base so that they could mortar across. And if it wasn't for the helicopters that we had there, at times we probably would have been hit a lot more than what we was. So.
Now, what's the time frame for this? Is there 70 to 72, or about when are you there?
I was there in 71 and 72. It was on a wind down. They were winding down, and the Vietnamese, we were turning a lot of stuff over to the Vietnamese at the time, and a lot of responsibility over, and they didn't want to. They wanted you to stay there and everything else. And but I got the Red Cross sent me a telegram that my father was in the hospital in Detroit. He had cancer, so they told me to go home, and so I left out of Saigon. I had to leave all my gear there and everything there, and then went in Detroit. And my father, he was in the hospital. He made it through that, but he died later. He survived a couple of years. All my gear and everything, and if it wasn't for this one friend of mine, he was a warrant officer that we worked together a lot. He packed up all my gear. He turned in my weapons, and packed up all my gear, and I got everything back except the 2 captured weapons that I had that had Chinese communist writing on them and everything. They were souvenirs, and that I had picked up over there. And usually the Air Force had the customs in Saigon, and they'd go through this stuff, and if they see something they want it, they'd take it instead of sending it where it's supposed to go. So I lost that, but other than that, I got everything back, and I went to Detroit, and I got orders from Detroit, and I went back to Norfolk, Virginia again, and I was assigned to Fib Op Tre Lant.
Which means?
Commander Amphibious Operational Training Command, which I was stationed there, and we had to give the amphibious type ships their training before they went overseas, or if they were going into combat zone or whatever. We had to make sure that they knew what they were doing, and we'd go down to North Carolina, pick up Marines and drop them off on the beach, and with these the new style LSTs and everything. And So we'd go out on the ship for a couple days at a time, 3 days or whatever, and then back and forth, and stayed there until I decided that I had enough time in, I was going to retire. And then after I put my papers in and everything, and then I found out that was the biggest mistake I ever made. Because I put my papers in, and I got a letter back saying, yep, you had enough time, you can retire in July. Well, in the meantime, I had taken the exam for Chief Warrant Officer twice. And I always passed the test and everything, but quotas and everything, and so get my date back for retirement. A couple weeks later, I get a letter. You're being considered for a warrant officer. Oh boy. Now I went to the commanding officer. I says, did you get a letter? He says, yep. I said, I got my papers in. He says, well, what do you want to do? I says, cancel them. Cancel them. See if we can cancel them. He wrote a big letter to the Washington. They wouldn't cancel them. Wouldn't cancel them. They say, once you get your date for retirement, that's it. You're going and everything. So I lost out on Chief Warrant Officer. And if I would have made that, they would have had to throw me out of the Navy. They would have had to kick me out because I had stayed in until they absolutely said, hey, you got to go.
What's the difference between a Chief Warrant Officer's duty and the kind that you had?
Well, the Chief Petty Officers, like they always say, Chief Petty Officers runs the Navy. They run the Navy. Warrant Officers, they're the step up from your Chief Petty Officer and your regular officer. And they're the go-between between your enlisted and your officer. And the warrant officer, if you ever make a warrant officer, it's the pay and the prestige and everything. But the warrant officers always come back to the chief. So, chief, what's going on here? What's going on there? And then they go back to the officers, and the officers go to the warrant officers, and But warrant officer, as far as an officer grade or whatever, is some of your best grades that you can get in the Navy. So
okay, so you missed that, and so now what did you do when you got out of service then?
I stayed in Virginia for about 2 years, and I started a repair painting business, and then that was in. I actually got out on active duty in 1973, and I stayed down there until 75. And first part of 75, then my father died, and so I decided, well, that was the period of time that we were almost in a recession, and I packed up down there and put my house up for sale, packed up and moved back to Grand Rapids. Ended up in Caledonia for a short period of time, then Granville, and then ended up in Byron Center. So.
Okay. Now, did you have a family in tow, or were you on your own?
No, I had a family. I had a wife and four children. I had 2 boys, 2 girls, and
when did you get married?
I got married in 1957.
Okay.
One son was born over in Spain when I was over there, when we set up the Polaris base. And one was born in Ludington, one was born in Portsmouth, Virginia, and one was born in Charleston, South Carolina. So I had them all over the place. The biggest problem was my son that was born in Spain. He'd go through the American consulate and everything, and at one time they wouldn't even let him out of Canada because he said he was born in Spain, and they held him there for I don't know how many hours, and he had a Michigan driver's license. He had his Native American card that he was part Indian, and he had all this stuff and everything, and there was a gal on the border, and she gave him a hard time about it and everything. As soon as he said, when she said, well, where's you born? Well, he wasn't going to lie to her. I was born in Spain. Well, then her supervisor seen Bill standing in there, and they stripped his car. They took everything out of it and everything else. And the guy come in, he says, what are you doing here yet? Bill says, that gal out there, she stripping my car down. What's she looking for? No idea. And so he went out there, and he talked to her, and he come back, and he looked like he was just madder than heck. And he says, she's putting your car back together. He says, you get out of here. Mm-hmm. He says, you don't need to be standing around here. And I guess they went out and had some words, and they put his car back together, and he got in his car and come back. He was over, where was he at that time? Over in Detroit. He went across by Detroit, mm-hmm. and he had some friends that lived in Canada. But he had a big problem there for a while.
Right. Back at the beginning of the story, you talked about how your family had left Sault Ste. Marie because there was discrimination, issues like that. How were you treated in the Navy? And people, if they knew you were Native American, did it make any difference to them? Or?
No. Didn't get treated no different than anybody else. Mm-hmm. And back then, it was just starting that even the blacks, you know, they were getting where they were being treated, you know, the way they should be, right. And everything. But I'll tell you, when I first went in service, when the first time I went to Norfolk, Virginia, it's hard to believe, even back there, and yeah, this has been a number of years ago. When I first went there, people had signs in their yard. Sailors and dogs keep off the grass. When I went to Charleston, we didn't have no transportation, so a lot of it was from the base. If you're going into town, you jumped on the bus or whatever. Right. If the bus was filled up, you're hanging on. Mm-hmm. Somebody in the back, some colored man or woman, they'd come out and take their seat. You know, no, go sit down. Oh, no. Mm-hmm. Take their seat. You know, back then it had the restrooms, mm-hmm. white only or black only. Mm-hmm. You know, and the bus stations and everything else. And it was just, for me, coming from up here, old farm boy, that was just, you know, hard to believe that there was places like that. Mm-hmm. You know, I never heard of, you know, Wallace, you know, yeah, we had some black families up there that, you know, and hey, we didn't treat them any different than anybody else, you know. But boy, you get down south.
But was Norfolk different from Charleston as far as that kind of thing went? Because they're both southern states. Yeah.
Norfolk was quite a bit different because there was so much military there. Mm-hmm. And Charleston, over to the one side, but now you're getting down into the deeper south in Charleston. So Charleston was worse than, you know, Norfolk, Virginia. So.
Now, to look back at the whole thing, how do you think your experience in the military kind of affected you or kind of shaped who you are as a person?
No, I'll tell you, for me, I would do it all over again. I love the military, mm-hmm. you know, and I do it over again. And I think being in the military and staying in like that there, it makes you stronger. Mm-hmm. And you know, I went to high school and I worked in a factory during my summertime and everything. Mm-hmm. And after that, except for the military, I've never punched a clock. Mm-hmm. On my own, I started my own business, and when I got out of service, I can't say that. I worked a little bit for a rental store over there on 44th Street. I worked there for a year and a half, and decided, this isn't for me, I'm going to open my own. So I opened my own rental store, mm-hmm. and I run that for almost 20 years. And in the meantime, I built a building. I bought property, built a building, mm-hmm. and everything, and I still have the building. I have it up for sale right now. But really, as far as working in a factory or working here or there, I've never punched a time clock. And I credit that for the experience that I had, you know, during the service. And my brother retired from the service. He was a chief petty officer in the Navy. I had two brother-in-laws that both retired chief petty officers from the Navy. I retired as a chief petty officer. I have a brother over in Muskegon that stayed in the reserves. He's been in the Navy, I don't know how many years. And he was Second World War, and then called back in Korea, and he got radiation poisoning from the atomic test and everything, and he's had, I think, 2 cancer operations now, and he's 80 years old. And but that was all from the atomic bombs that was over there, and he participated in some of them operations over there. And so far, I have no problems that I know of, but I get letters every once in a while. We check for Agent Orange, and I filled out all the stuff that they request and everything, and never had no problems or anything. My other brother, he retired from the Navy. He has a lot of problems. His hearing's gone, and because he was in a billet that they call fire control technician. He was a fire control technician. He was off the coast of Vietnam and shore bombardment almost every day. And his hearing is about shot, and he's got ringing in his ears continuously and everything. And he's 76 now, 77, something like that. And but he has problems. But myself, no, as yet, knock on wood,
Well, you came through well, and you tell a good story on top of it.
No, like I say, I enjoyed the service. Vietnam was hectic, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on over there that you just, more or less want to forget and everything. So, but I survived it, and so.
Hey,
Sitting here today. So
thank you very much for talking to us today.
Appreciate you asking me over. So.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think probably writing down the story was